Hello and welcome to Money Free Economics episode 14. In this episode, we'll talk about aviation. If you want to get in touch, my email is in the top left corner of the screen. So let's look at private aviation and air clubs. We want people who want to fly, want to become pilots, and also want to use jet services, private jet services here in particular on this slide. We want them to get their jets for free, or if they don't want to own jets, they can get jet services for free at any time. No, right. Let's say you're talking about a population of several million, maybe several tens of millions. I think it's quite possible to actually have a thousand, maybe several thousand small business jets in the country just for those purposes. Um, there's one, of course, condition for that is that if you're going to have hundreds of flights every day in your country, let's say it's a medium sized country, um, you're going to need more airports or just simply bigger airports. So some countries, they know that they have to, just the airline traffic in general, they know that there's a lot of airline traffic. So what they do is they build the airports with a lot of landing strips, and you have these like massive airports in some parts, some countries, some big cities in the world. We can also extend that to helicopter services in general. Air clubs can own their own planes. Obviously, you can create an air club. You can join an air club. Your air club it can have its own airstrip. It can use an airstrip that's further away. So not just for gliders and small aircraft for recreational purposes. These clubs can also hold classic aircraft. So we're talking, I don't know, World War II fighter aircraft, things like that. These air clubs should be able to also construct their own aircraft. Obviously, they will need to abide by standards, engineering, structural standards. Yeah, so we'll talk a little about these military and government purposes. I think all aviation companies should be brought under a national corporation of aviation. We'll also talk about, I could just say that now, the defunct aviation companies. So, like, let's say, um, Eastern Bloc countries in the Cold War, they had several um, aircraft corporations. Now, most of these, because the militaries are no longer buying as much aircraft, these aviation companies have become basically bankrupt and defunct. So we can revive those as well. One main problem, I think, is probably the biggest problem, to do with international flights, but also obviously just aviation flights in general, is the availability of fuel. Um, I think if a country has a lot of flights going in and out, and obviously that most airline planes, they don't have big enough fuel tanks to get from, let's say, from one half of the planet to the other half without stopping in another country to refuel. So that's fuel is a big problem, and to tackle that, really, you need a government fund, and you need to um, prearrange these refueling operations with whatever airport your plane has landed in to refuel. Solar powered planes are currently being tested around the world. They're currently insufficient. The ones that are efficient, and we're talking about planes powered by solar panels. The ones that are efficient, they can't hold any cargo, and they're not that big. Producing fuel. So obviously, there's international standards for fuel production. Yeah, that needs to be looked into as well. Um, the national airlines, they should service all countries, and they should have minimum amounts of flights per country. Now, most flight planning and obviously determining where each plane is going to go to, should be based on customer input, which means that you, the person going to fly on the plane, or basically you're going to pre-order your flight, and the government is going to figure out the most efficient way of moving you around the world. Um, Cargo. Flights, cargo airliners are just basically similar to passenger airliners, although they just carry mail, they carry mail, medicine, high value goods. I think there should be a fleet of cargo airliners, and particularly to move around medicine and other high value goods. Maybe some form of technology, I'm not too sure. Um, we talked about disbanding the armed forces, but I think there's still a need for like a short range transport aircrafts for police purposes, for firefighting purposes, whatever stuff like that. Logistics, moving around logistics, things like that. And you can obviously factor helicopters in this topic as well. Air ambulances. I've also talked about this in a previous episode. Most airliners, air ambulances. I think. Well, it depends. If you're living like let's say in a country in Europe, you're bound to find a hospital within like let's say an hour's drive. But for remote areas, you might need helicopters. So remote areas, mountains, or just high casualty events, these are good. Helicopters are probably, um, if not the most efficient way to move these patients around. So most air ambulances should be helicopters that can fit at least one or two stretchers, maybe even more, and then additional attendants. And you might also need jets to move patients around across borders. So airport treaties, I think there's a legal difference between an international airport and a regular, just non-international airport. I can't really tell you the details. I'm not too sure myself. These airport treaties, obviously, any country can enter them. Any airline company can enter them, and what they offer is just basically prearranged fuel for all the planes that are going in and out. Some other things, probably maybe maintenance to some degree, but yeah. Internal flights. People may like the idea of moving with internal flights, but if railways can get from A to B faster than that, that might incentivize customers to not use flights. Internal flights, obviously, government flights are going to be prioritized. That's moving government officials, but also for police purposes. Basically, that's yeah. Here's some comments, things that didn't make it into the presentation. I think one big thing to keep in mind is that domestic aircraft factories they require a lot of time to be able to produce complicated aircraft. So if they start off producing something simple and then maybe a decade or two down the line, if there's a lot of resources that they can get, they may be able to produce complicated things. Maybe all the way even to stealth jet fighters, things like that. The airline fleet, I think it's probably the best to buy from existing airliner manufacturers. Producing small helicopters and just fighter jets, things like that, is much different from producing airliners that fit 300, 400 people that fly almost every day around the world. There's maintenance issues as well. um, we should have national pilot schools. They're free of charge, so anyone who wants to become a pilot can go to these schools. Finally, just want to say domestic aircraft factories, they should exist and they should work their way into producing more and more complicated aircraft with all the statistics that they generate from existing flights, from the data that they analyze, and things like that. Uh, to go with that, air designers, builders, mechanics should be preserved as a trade group. I think also aerospace engineering can be introduced in secondary schools. So we're talking pre university basically last 4 years before students graduate at the age of 18 or so.